way down upon the Suwannee River, far, far away.
Okay, hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about a hike along the Suwannee River, the western section of the Florida Trail on the Suwannee River. And we took this trip with the Sierra Club. We had an outing with several people, I'd say 6 or 7 people, back in March of 2020. And it was a good time had by all, a little hot. And it was just before the first COVID lockdown. So this is our last normal, semi-normal outing that we were able to have before we had to stop doing the outing. So it's particularly memorable and fond memories for me. And I hope that in the coming months, we'll be able to open up the outings again so we can get outside together again. The section we are hiking is located around where you see this this little starburst here. So it's the western end of the Suwannee River, as I mentioned. The Florida Trail extends about 70 miles through the Suwannee, fairly uninterrupted by any roads or any road walks that you need to do. So it's a really nice area to get out and do some long distance backpacking on several days in a row. You can go without encountering much in terms of, overly civilized road walks or a lot of towns or anything. So there's enough there. You can go resupply if you need, but most of the time you're just walking along the beautiful river. And our particular hike, again, was at the western end of that section. We began at Gibson Park, which is a county park, and we continued to the Black Track Trailhead, which is about as far as you can go before you hit a very long road walk that connects the western end of that Suwannee section with the next wooded wilderness section, which is in the Scylla River section, which leads down into the Big Bend, Florida. So this is a little better picture of the Suwannee River itself. The black line here is the Suwannee River. This is the section we hiked, an approximation of where we actually hiked. Here is the actual hiking route in a little more detail. And we read this from right to left because we are hiking east to west, which is northbound per the orientation of the Florida Trail, which runs from the southern peninsula of Florida, way down in the Everglades at Big Cypress National Preserve, all the way up the peninsula and then out west along the panhandle to Pensacola. So while we're traveling west in terms of the maps and the mileage, this is northbound per the Florida Trail orientation, but we're actually traveling east to west compass. And so we spent the first day getting out to our campsite, which is about a mile east of the boundary of the Suwannee River State Park, which is a beautiful state park out near Live Oak. And this was a 6.7 mile first day. And then we camped along the river that night. And then we went about a mile, as I said, and then we went into the Suwannee River State Park, crossed the boundary there and took what's called the Big Oak Trail, which is a beautiful, very special trail through the park, and then down to the western border of the park. We had an option for weekend hikers on that 3-day hike. So those that could only stay with us 2 days had a way to exit at that point. And they just exited and crossed the river on a bridge to the state park parking lot, which is where they left cars. And the 3-dayers continued on to a nice campsite right above the river with a shelter and a picnic table called Cooper's Bluff. And then from Cooper's Bluff on the third day, we continued through Twin Rivers State Forest to our cars down along a country road at the Black Tract Trailhead. And that was about 6.2 miles. And our second day was a 9-mile day, 9.2 miles. A little bit about the Suwannee River itself. It's 246 miles long. Its origins are in the Okefenokee Swamp, and its mouth is in the Gulf of Mexico on the west coast of Florida. It's a blackwater river. What blackwater means is it's a slow-moving river. It doesn't have its source at a high altitude like a river. And so it's very slow moving. In this case, of course, you can see it comes from the swamp. It's not a lot higher than the rest of Florida up there in Georgia. So it flows pretty slowly, generally speaking. It flows through forested areas, and thereby it collects a lot of tannins from the leaves and the other organic detritus from those trees growing along its banks, and that's what makes it a very dark colored water. So these dark colored materials are called tannins. They are not poisonous. They don't harm the quality of the water for drinking, but they do discolor it. So it looks like an iced tea drink when you retrieve some of the water from the Suwannee River, but it's on the most part, it's potable water for the most part. This river has been designated a wild river. It's one of the few major wild rivers on the eastern coast. A wild river means that its entire flow has not been interrupted by a dam or other interventions. So that's fairly rare on the eastern seaboard. Many of the major rivers have been dammed for various purposes, either flood control or to provide power, or for canals for transportation. But this Suwannee River is truly untouched by that type of intervention, and as such has been designated a wild river. There are 300 springs along its watershed. There's 33 of them that are first magnitude, which is the highest flowing types of springs. And we're going to encounter a very large spring in the first day of this hike. The water levels fluctuate. The Suwannee River customarily floods on a seasonal basis. So even though the banks are very high, as you'll see in some of these pictures, we're walking along a trail that's on the banks of the Suwannee River, probably 30 to 40 feet above the surface of the river. And when we did this hike, the river was running fast and a little high. But at a flood stage, the water will rise above those 30, 40-foot banks and actually spill over into a floodplain on either side of the river. It's a fairly common occurrence. So if you're thinking of hiking the Suwannee River, make sure and check with the Suwannee River Water Management District first, and you'll be able to get on that website a water report for various points along the way, and that water level indicator will also compare the current water level with the flood stage. So if you're at a flood stage, there'll be some comment about it also on that graph, but you will also be able to see that the water level is exceeding the flood stage, and which means that it's overflowed the banks, and hiking will be dangerous if not impassable. So please do check on that before you attempt to hike out on the Suwannee River. It's again not the usual state of the river, but it does happen periodically, usually once a year. So we are hiking through 4 management areas. The first was Gibson Park, so that's the county park. And so in the case of Gibson Park, there was really no fees to park there. I think there's a little fee to do any overnight camping there. It's a beautiful little park that allows RV parking and RV camping and just regular car camping, and there are restroom facilities there. And it's very picturesque. So we left our cars there. There were no fees for doing that. And then we hiked along the Suwannee River until we got to Suwannee River State Park. So along most of the Suwannee River, along the Florida Trail, most of that is under the jurisdiction of the Suwannee River Management District. So luckily for us, within that floodplain that they managed, there's no fees for camping. There's a lot of great camping spots along the way. So there's some designated ones you can see on maps that are all, primitive camping experiences, of course. But really anywhere you can find a flat space along the river, which is very frequent, you can just go ahead and camp. So Suwannee River Management District is really great about that. Then we entered into the Suwannee River State Park, which is, again, as I mentioned, I think one of the most beautiful state parks in Florida. It's like really stepping back in time into quote unquote the old Florida or the old South, with beautiful trees, oak trees with Spanish moss hanging over the river banks, in the broad river there. And it's just a beautiful place to visit. Even if you don't hike a lot, you can go out and park there and walk around and enjoy the river up close and personal. And then we went into the Twin Rivers State Forest. So with a lot of hiking in Florida, you need to think about the different jurisdictions and who's managing the areas you're walking through. Mostly they are public areas along the Florida Trail. So in some cases, there are permits that are required for parking, for camping. But in this case, along this section, there are no permits required for any of these parking or camping activities. So as I said, day one, we started in Gibson Park. We left some cars at the end of our hike, and then we met back at Gibson Park, or took people back to Gibson Park and left some cars at Gibson Park. And so as I mentioned, it's free parking, nice little county park. And from there, we headed up the Highway 751. And we just go north on that a little bit and go along the road, and then there'll be a big bridge there, and you'll cross the Arapahoe River. And just after the river, you're going to be turning left and be heading west, and then you're actually, onto the trail, back into the woods, and you're going to go through a couple miles along the Arapahoe through the woods. And at that point, the Arapahoe joins up with the Suwannee River. And from about that point on, for the next day or two, we are hiking along the Suwannee every step of the way. And again, just a beautiful experience, be close to that body of water. And so about a quarter mile down the Suwannee, you come up to what's called the Arapahoe Rise. And that is a spring head. And you could see from this picture, it's a little hard to see, but it's almost like a big sinkhole with some limestone walls along the side of it. And that is, the spring head, and the boil of the spring is in this body of water here. It looks like a little pool surrounded by walls of limestone. And this is actually the largest spring in the United States by volume of water flow. So it's pretty impressive, but not very well known. There's no public facilities here. There's no roads to it. So the only way to see it is to get out there and hike in like we did. And it's a pretty impressive spring. So we continue along the banks of the Suwannee. You can see the picture here, how well manicured the trail is, what an easy walk it is. To your left, you see a peek at the water of the Suwannee, and it's just just a beautiful, pleasant walk. There are high bluffs along the Suwannee River, as I mentioned, and many sandy beaches. The sand is washed up when the Suwannee overflows its bank when it's doing its seasonal flooding. And there's a hardwood forest on the high ground, mostly live oak, beech, and hickories, and some pine. And then to your right, if you're looking at the picture there, to the north of the river, we're in the north bank, there's a depression of some sort and a lower lying area, which is where the floodplain is. And then you'll have more of a floodplain forest, such as sweet gum, water oak, and bay trees, and some cypress. So at the end of that hike, we were again hiking in 6.7 miles, I believe, and we found a campsite by the side of the river, about a mile from the state park boundary. We were able to filter water from the river. It's quite a steep climb down to the river, but it was accessible. And there were some nice little benches, a little fire ring, and it was a great little campsite for us. We had a little time to cool off from the hot day because there was a sandy beach area nearby, and there are some people, some residences that are beyond the floodplain within walking distance of this campsite in this beach area. So local residents have left very nicely some chaise lounges there where we could lounge and rest our feet and take a little dip in the water and sunbathe afterwards. So it was a really neat little refreshing interlude. Okay, day 2, we took off and hiked again, continuing west along the Suwannee River till we reached about a mile, this Big Oak Trailhead, which is also a boat ramp. You can see down this cement boat ramp how it's pretty high water during that hike that we took. And so there's a way at the end here, there's a dock that's really mostly submerged in water right now. Usually you can walk out on that dock. So the water was pretty high and it was flowing pretty fast the few days we were there. So this is also the access to the Big Oak Trail. That's why they call it the Big Oak Trailhead. However, that trailhead has been closed for the last 10 years or so, I believe, and just recently opened up to the Florida Trail. So there used to be a detour that was mostly walking along the road in this little neighborhood that's by this trailhead. And we had to go all the way around the entire Suwannee River State Park on a little road to get to the trail that's on the western end of that park. Now that trailhead has been opened up again, so that now the Florida Trail can go through the Suwannee River State Park on one of its most beautiful trails called the Big Oak Trail. And so that's what we did. So that was great. We were some of the first hikers to be able to go through that new access to the Big Oak Trail. So this is some pictures of the Big Oak Trail entrance, and the trail goes along beautiful forest again along the Suwannee River. And the reason they call it the Big Oak Trail is because of this big oak. And you can see how tall it is, how old it is, and how wide it is at the base. It's probably a dozen people hand to hand could encircle it. So as you continue on that Big Oak Trail, you're coming down the Suwannee River, and the trail kind of comes along like this. And then at this point, you're meeting up with the Withlacoochee River. So your Suwannee River is coming east to west like this. The Withlacoochee River is coming from the north to the south. It's a little browner in color. So it's a little more tannins in the water of the Withlacoochee, a little more soil as well. So the trail then, of course, we'll have to make a turn. There's no bridge here. So the trail makes a turn to the north and then follows the eastern bank of the Withlacoochee, which is then what we did for the rest of that morning till it then turns when it's reached a bridge several miles north of here, and then it crosses the Withlacoochee, and then we come down the other side. So here's some pictures of along the Withlacoochee. See the forest is a little different. The banks are a little grassier, and the river itself is a little darker. Once we crossed the Withlacoochee on that road bridge, and we began to go south along the western bank of the Withlacoochee, we encounter a ghost town of an old Florida town called Ellaville, which built up around a lumber mill started by this gentleman. And there's a little sign. This is a picture of the signage talking about that lumber mill, the railroad that served the community. And if we go back off the trail a bit, you can see the ruins of the buildings. Just the foundations are left from that community that existed back. It was the 1870s and 1880s is when it was most active. So that's a little interesting place to visit along this hike. So one of our challenges in this particular hike was a water accident that had happened up in Valdosta, Georgia, which is the source. Well, it's close to the source of the Withlacoochee. The Withlacoochee, as I mentioned, flows from north to south. So it flows through Valdosta. Valdosta seems to have some perennial problems with its sewage system. So I know in the last 2 years, both years, they've had a problem where they dumped and leaked raw sewage into the Withlacoochee River. And this was one of those occurrences. So staying attuned to reports from local county officials, we went on the Hamilton County website and found that there was still a warning that the water should not be drunk at all, even if it's filtered, that the level of bacteria was just too high, and even swimming should be refrained from. And so from this point on, we couldn't drink from natural water sources. And so we had to make sure we stocked up enough water from our first day when we were above the confluence of the Withlacoochee and the Suwannee. And then those of us who were continuing on and camping that night, what we did was we cached water. We pre-staged some water as far as we could drive in close to that day 2 campsite. And then we hiked up and retrieved that water that day. So again, when you're hiking in these areas, you really need to pay attention to news and local media reporting and also, even the boards of health of those areas, because unfortunately, we do have problems sometimes keeping our bodies of water clean and drinkable. So you really realize when you're hiking how important these fundamentals of human life are, because we can't just turn on the tap in our house and assume it's going to be good water. And we don't always have access to any water source when we're hiking in the backcountry. So we need to plan that we're near water sources at appropriate times so that we can replenish our water supply. We can't carry, it's so heavy, you cannot carry 3 days of water. So you need to plan and need to be able to have clean water, clean drinking water, so basic and fundamental to human health. And so it's another reminder to protect our bodies of water and to keep our water clean and drinkable. So here's another map showing how our route went. So we're coming down through this big oak trail and then hit the Withlacoochee, went north, and then came across this bridge and then came back down south. So the 2-day hikers exited across this bridge or a similar bridge and then went out to the parking area of Suwannee River State Park, and that's where they parked and they left. We went on, we continued down the Suwannee, and there was a campsite right there, the Cooper's Bluff campsite. Oh, here is the Cooper's Bluff campsite. It's this shelter that I mentioned with a couple of picnic tables, some benches, very, very convenient if it's raining hard. Gives you a lot of shelter. It's open air. There's a little fire ring there, a lot of room to pitch tents. And there's this old cabin there, which again, probably not very useful for any shelter. The roof caved in. It's kind of an interesting artifact. And here we are retrieving our water cache and hiking it back to our campsite. So we had fresh water, clean water that night. Day 3, we continued down into the Twin River State Forest. We had some unexpected flooding on the trail, and that you should be prepared for whenever you're hiking along the Florida Trail. Florida has very low lying areas. It can easily flood anytime, depending on weather conditions. So in this case, we were a little surprised to find this area is pretty flooded. So we did a little walking through the water and then got back to our car. We were able to change in some dry gear for the ride home. So that is our trip along the Suwannee River, and I hope you enjoyed reliving that experience with me. And I hope you have a chance, if you haven't already, to get out on the Suwannee River along the Florida Trail sometime, do some hiking in the backcountry. And I hope that we will see you once we open back up on a Sierra Club outing for real sometime out in the real outdoors. But in the meantime, it's been a pleasure to talk to you and take a virtual hike over this Zoom medium that we have now. So thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.
How my heart